It was a golden summer afternoon, and the Caribbean coastline sparkled like a memory waiting to happen. Isabella walked along the shore, her bare feet sinking into the warm, soft sand with every step, her long, chestnut-brown hair caught in the gentle breeze, framing her almond-shaped eyes as they looked out at the endless horizon. At 20, Isabella's life felt as bright as the sun above her. She was young, determined, and dreamed of becoming a nurse, working hard to make that dream come true. Her days were peaceful, as calm as the sea before her. Then she saw him. He was a little way down the beach, his tall figure outlined by the setting sun. His skin was warm and tanned, like someone who spent a lot of time under the sun, and his dark, intense eyes seemed to hold secrets. He was looking at her with curiosity, just like she was looking at him. His name was Zaid, and he was from Saudi Arabia, here on vacation with his family. For Isabella, seeing him felt like something from a story, one of those stories her mom had warned her about, with strangers and adventures. Zaid's gaze softened as he came closer. His English had an accent, making his words sound careful and special. "It's beautiful here, isn't it?" he said, looking out at the ocean, just as she had been doing. Isabella smiled, intrigued by his quiet confidence and his presence in her small, familiar world. The days that followed were full of new discoveries, with each meeting feeling like a hidden gift. They walked along the beach, her laughter blending with the sounds of the waves as he told her stories of distant lands, tales of luxury and tradition from a world so different from her own. His words painted pictures in her mind of vast deserts, golden palaces, and ancient customs. Isabella found herself fascinated by his world, with her curiosity growing with every tale, every shared sunset. She talked to him about her life here, her family's cozy but simple home, and her dream of becoming a nurse. Zaid listened intently, his gaze focused on her in a way that made her heart race. Then, one night, under a sky full of stars, Zaid said something that took her by surprise. "Come with me to Saudi Arabia, Isabella. Let me show you my world." His voice was soft, hopeful, and his eyes held her with a look that made her heart skip a beat. She hesitated, but "my studies, my family—" Her voice trailed off as she looked into his face for answers. He smiled gently, reaching out for her hand. "I'll take care of everything. Just say yes. Think of it as an adventure, a new beginning." That night, Isabella lay awake, her thoughts spinning. The idea of leaving everything she'd ever known felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into the unknown. But Zaid's words echoed in her mind, pulling her toward him, towards something beyond her small world. The next morning, Isabella told her mother. Her mother looked worried, but after listening to Isabella's passionate words and seeing the sparkle in her eyes, she sighed. "Take care. The world outside is not always as kind as it seems," she warned. But Isabella, too excited to pay attention, thought only of the life Zaid had described. With her mother's reluctant blessing, she packed her bag, her heart full of both fear and excitement. She got on a plane to a country she had only heard of in stories, her mind full of dreams, not knowing what lay ahead. When they arrived in Riyadh, the city seemed like a vision from a dream. The buildings were made of glass and steel, stretching high into the sky, while below, colorful markets and traditional buildings filled the streets. But none of it prepared her for the sight of Zaid's home. His house was like a palace, a big mansion with lush gardens and fancy fountains, right in the middle of the desert. That evening, as they were having a fancy dinner, Zaid suddenly stood up, his eyes soft but serious. He lowered himself to one knee and, with emotion in his voice, looked into her eyes. "My dearest Isabella, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The room fell silent, and Isabella's breath caught in her throat. She looked at him, the man who had brought her into a world she could barely understand. In that moment, with his eyes on her and her heart beating fast, Isabella whispered, "Yes?" Zaid kept renewing his proposal every night, and each time, Isabella felt her heart softening more and more. The love she felt mixed with the beauty of this new world, making it hard to think clearly. After a week, Isabella agreed to marry him. Zaid's happiness was beyond words, and soon they began planning a grand wedding. Isabella was swept up in the excitement, hardly able to think. In a moment of calm, she called her mother with shaking hands. "Mom," she said, her voice full of mixed emotions, "I'm getting married to Zaid." There was silence on the other end. Her mother sounded shocked and worried. "Isabella, my child, are you sure? It's too soon, and his culture is so different." But Isabella, full of love and dreams, didn't listen to her mother's concerns. As the wedding preparations sped up, Isabella felt surrounded by jewels, silks, and perfumes. The women in Zaid's family helped her learn the traditions, teaching her what was expected of a wife in their culture. When Isabella's family arrived, they looked happy but also a bit worried. Her mother hugged her tightly, whispering, "It's not too late to change your mind." But Isabella, dazzled by love and the luxury around her, shook her head. "I'm happy, Mom. Everything will be okay." The wedding was full of opulence and tradition. Isabella wore a gown that looked like it was from a fairy tale, and she felt like a princess. Zaid's love-filled eyes melted any doubt she had. After 3 days of celebration, it was time to say goodbye to her family. Zaid suggested that Isabella's family should leave, saying they needed time alone to start their new life. Isabella, still in a happy daze, didn't notice her family's hesitation as they left. Watching their car drive away, she felt a strange feeling, as if a piece of her had left with them. The first few days after the wedding were like a dream. Zaid showered her with attention, gifts, and promises of love. They walked through the mansion's gardens, had romantic dinners under the stars, and talked about their dreams. But slowly, Isabella started noticing small changes in Zaid's behavior. What had seemed like love and care began to feel like strict control over her life. The first sign was when Zaid asked her to delete her social media. "You're my wife now," he said gently. "You don't need those outside distractions. Here, you have everything you could want." Isabella felt surprised and tried to explain that it was her way of staying in touch with her family and friends. But Zaid insisted. His tone became firm. "It's for your own good, Isabella. The outside world will only bring trouble." Reluctantly, Isabella agreed, telling herself it was a small sacrifice for her new life. The next step was a change in her wardrobe. Zaid gave her a new set of clothes, abayas and veils. "These are the clothes for a married woman in our culture," he explained. Isabella felt uncomfortable with the idea of covering herself completely and tried to discuss it with him. "But Zaid, I'm not Muslim. Can I wear something a little more Western?" His expression hardened. "You are my wife now, Isabella. You must respect our customs. In time, you will understand." Gradually, Isabella found herself cut off from the outside world. Her outings were limited to family or social events, and always with Zaid watching. She rarely spoke to her family back in the United States, and when she did, Zaid was always there listening. One day, Zaid asked her to delete all her contacts, including her mother's number. "You don't need them anymore," he said. "I am your family now." Isabella, with tears in her eyes, pleaded to keep her mother's number, but Zaid was firm. "It's for your own good, my love, so you can adapt to your new life." Isabella's changes were slow but constant. Her Western clothes disappeared, and she only wore the abayas and veils. She stopped speaking her quick, happy English, now speaking in shy, hesitant Arabic. Her dream of becoming a nurse faded as she took on the role of an obedient wife. Zaid justified every change as his way of protecting her. "The outside world is dangerous," he would say. "Here, you are safe and loved. What more could you want?" Part of Isabella wanted to shout, but another part of her began to believe his words. When she found out she was pregnant, she felt a new joy in her dark world. Zaid was thrilled, calling it a blessing and saying their child would be proof of their love. Isabella was going to have a baby, but this made her husband, Zaid, more controlling. He said it was to keep the baby healthy, but he watched her every move and wouldn't even let her go to the garden. Every meal and every part of her day was decided by him. As her belly grew, her world got smaller. The big, fancy mansion that once felt magical now felt like a prison. Her baby became her only comfort, reminding her of the happy person she used to be. Back in America, Isabella's family was very worried. They didn't hear from her much, and when they did, Zaid was always listening. So Isabella spoke like everything was okay. But her mom could tell something was wrong. Her daughter's happy voice was gone, replaced by a sad and tired tone. Her parents decided to fly all the way to Zaid's mansion to check on her. But when they got there, Zaid didn't welcome them. He stood at the door, saying Isabella was too tired to see anyone because of her pregnancy. Isabella's parents begged to see her, but Zaid didn't let them, saying, "She's my wife now. She lives by our customs and doesn't need outside influence." Heartbroken, they went back to America, never seeing Isabella. Her mother cried on the plane home, feeling like she had failed her daughter. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Isabella didn't even know her parents had come to see her. Zaid had given her medicine to make her sleep, saying it was for her and the baby's health. When she woke up, he told her, "Your parents called to say they won't be coming back. They understand this is your life now." Hearing this, Isabella felt a deep sadness, like her last connection to her old life had disappeared. She hugged her belly and whispered to her unborn baby, "I will protect you. You'll be free." After some months, Isabella had her first child, a boy, whom Zaid named Jacob. Isabella was so happy to have her baby boy, loving him deeply. But she was also scared that he would grow up under Zaid's strict control. She would hold Jacob and sing him soft lullabies from America, but only when she knew no one was watching. These moments reminded her of her old life and gave her a small spark of happiness, but they didn't last long. Zaid, thrilled to be a father, became even more controlling. He wanted Jacob to be raised only with his traditions and didn't allow any American influence. When Isabella tried to add a bit of her own culture, Zaid would stop her. Then, just a few months after Jacob was born, Isabella found out she was pregnant again. She felt both happy and scared. The second pregnancy was harder than the first, both on her body and her mind. She felt even more trapped, as her life was now all about caring for Jacob and preparing for the new baby. When she gave birth again, she had a daughter, whom Zaid named Ava. Now, Isabella had to take care of two young children, while Zaid watched everything she did. He said a good mother doesn't need outside help, so she was always tired and wished she had her own mother or friends around to help her. During long days and nights spent caring for her children, Isabella missed her old life. Laughing with friends, family dinners filled with love and joy. The big, fancy mansion was filled with expensive things, but they couldn't make her happy. Zaid was often away for work, and when he was home, he would control everything Isabella and the children did. He didn't even let her talk to any men, not even her own family members. When they went out, he watched every little thing she did. Isabella felt like a beautiful bird locked in a fancy cage, admired but unable to fly. Every day felt the same. Wake up, care for the children, pray because Zaid made her, take care of the children again, and go to bed. There was no time for her own dreams or thoughts. In her alone time, she dreamed of running away with her children, going back to America to a life of freedom. But she knew this was just a dream. She had no money of her own, no passport, and no way to reach the outside world. She was as trapped as if the windows had iron bars. Then, Isabella discovered she was pregnant for the third time. This news made her feel even more trapped. Her body and mind felt tired, and she didn't know if she could handle another baby. When she told Zaid, he was thrilled, saying, "Allah has blessed us. Our family grows." But for Isabella, each word felt like her dreams were slipping further away. This third pregnancy was the hardest. Isabella became very sad, often staring out the window, imagining a life of freedom. Her children became her only happiness. She would whisper stories about America to them, telling them about the beaches and family they had never met. These secret talks kept her spirit alive. Isabella knew she had to find a way out, to give her children a different life. She started paying attention to small details around the house, like when Zaid was away or when she had a chance to use a phone or computer. She kept this information safe in her mind, waiting for the right moment. Life in the mansion continued as usual. Zaid, feeling secure in his control over Isabella, even started to relax some rules. He let her go outside to the garden with the children sometimes, thinking he still held complete power over her. Isabella was always watched by security guards, but during one of her walks in the garden, she got her first chance to get help. A gardener, an older man with gentle eyes, came close to her. While pretending to work on the plants nearby, he whispered, "If you need help, there are people who can help you." Isabella's heart started beating fast. Was this real, or was it a test from her husband, Zaid, to see if she was loyal? With shaking hands, she took the small piece of paper the gardener slipped her. She hid it deep in her clothes. That night, while taking a bath, she took out the paper and looked at it. It had a phone number and the words, "Call if you need help." She memorized the number, then destroyed the paper so no one could find it. For the next few days, Isabella didn't know what to do. She wanted freedom, but she was scared. If she tried to escape and was caught, she didn't know what Zaid would do to her or her children. Isabella noticed that Zaid was changing. Sometimes he was strangely sweet, and other times he got very angry for no reason. He started demanding more things from her, asking her to memorize parts of his religion and adopt his beliefs. One day, he got furious when he found her reading an American fairy tale book to the kids. In his anger, he tore the book apart and threatened to send their children to a strict school if Isabella didn't behave. That night, Isabella made her choice. She couldn't live like this anymore. When everyone was asleep, Isabella crept into Zaid's study, where he kept a phone. With shaking hands, she dialed the number she had memorized. A soft voice answered, and Isabella whispered, "Please help me. I want to go home." The person on the other end promised help was coming. But just as she hung up, she heard a noise. She turned and saw Zaid standing there, furious. "What have you done?" he growled, grabbing her. Isabella was terrified. She had never seen him this angry. She tried to pull away, but he was too strong. He dragged her out of the study. The children woke up and started crying, which broke Isabella's heart. She screamed, "I can't live like this anymore. This isn't a life, it's a prison." Her words only made Zaid angrier. "A prison," he shouted. "I have given you everything. Luxury, safety, a family. And this is how you thank me." Isabella felt a small spark of bravery and said, "I never asked for any of this. I want to go home to my family." Tears ran down her face, but her voice stayed strong. "This isn't love, Zaid. It's control." Zaid looked shocked but then turned cold. "Fine. You have two choices. You can stay here with your children and behave, or you can leave, but the children stay with me." Isabella's heart broke. "You can't do that," she whispered, horrified. But Zaid just smiled. "Oh, I can. In this country, the children belong to their father. If you leave, you lose them forever." Isabella felt as if her heart had been crushed. How could she leave her children? But how could she stay? She collapsed on the floor, crying. Zaid watched her, then knelt down beside her. His voice softened, but it was still hard underneath. "It doesn't have to be like this. Stay, and things will go back to normal." The next days were a nightmare. Zaid kept a close watch on her. He disconnected phones and removed computers. Isabella felt more like a prisoner than ever, but her love for her children made her strong. She knew she couldn't let them grow up in fear. One night, while Zaid was asleep, Isabella made the hardest decision of her life. She packed a small bag, then slipped quietly into her children's rooms. She kissed each one of them on the forehead and whispered, "I love you. I will come back for you. I promise." Her heart was breaking, but she knew she had to go. She went into Zaid's study to find her passport and important papers. But then she heard a noise behind her. Zaid was standing there, looking betrayed. "So, you've made your choice," he said. Isabella looked at him and said firmly, "Yes. I can't live like this anymore." Zaid put a piece of paper in front of her. Isabella read it and felt horror. It was a document saying she would give up her rights to her children. "You can't make me sign this," she whispered. But Zaid said coldly, "It's this or nothing. Sign it if you want to leave." Trembling, Isabella took the pen and signed, each stroke hurting her heart. Zaid took the paper and told her that the driver would take her to the airport. "Don't come back," he said. "If you do, there will be consequences." Isabella picked up her small suitcase, gave one last look at the house that had been her prison, and left. The drive to the airport was a blur. Only when she was seated on the plane did she truly realize what had happened. She was free, but at a terrible cost. She had left her children behind. She cried quietly for the entire flight. When the plane landed in the U.S., she felt like a different person. Her family was happy to see her, but they noticed her children were not with her. Her mother asked, "Where are my grandchildren?" Isabella broke down and told them everything. Her family hugged her, but they were sad and angry too. Isabella knew she couldn't give up. She went to lawyers and human rights groups, but they all told her the same thing. The agreement she had signed made it very hard for her to get her children back. Still, she wouldn't stop trying. She spent nights reading about other cases and looking for any way to bring her children home. Every day, her love for her children gave her strength. She missed them terribly and dreamed of them every night, seeing them reaching out for her. Though her heart was broken, she promised herself she would never give up. She would find a way, no matter how long it took or how hard it would be. She would go back for her children. Isabella lay in bed, her heart pounding and her body covered in sweat, feeling scared and full of guilt. She kept wondering if she had made the right choice. She thought about her 2 children, Jacob and Owen, and whether it would have been better to stay with them, even if it meant putting up with control and fear. But then she remembered how scared they looked when their father, Zaid, would get angry. She knew then that she had to be strong and fight, not just for herself, but for them. Isabella tried many times to call Zaid, hoping he'd let her see her children, but he ignored her calls and emails. It was like he had disappeared, taking the children with him and breaking Isabella's heart. As the months passed, Isabella realized that to have any chance of seeing her children again, she needed to become strong. With help from her family and friends, she began therapy. The therapy was hard and painful, forcing her to face sad memories and tough choices. But little by little, she started to feel like her old self again. She also started studying to become a nurse, something she had once dreamed of before she met Zaid. Every book she read and every test she passed felt like she was winning a small battle, one step closer to getting back what she had lost. Even though she was feeling better, the legal fight to see her children seemed impossible. She had signed an agreement that gave Zaid full custody of the children, and the laws in his country were very strict. She felt hopeless until one day she met a woman named Claire who had gone through something similar. Claire told her about groups and organizations that help parents who are kept away from their children in other countries. Isabella felt hope again for the first time in a long time. With Claire's advice, Isabella contacted one of these organizations and shared her story. They told her that it would be a long and hard journey, but Isabella was ready to do anything to get her children back. In Saudi Arabia, where her children were living, Zaid had hired a nanny to look after them. He told the kids that their mother had left them and didn't love them anymore, but Jacob, the oldest, remembered her love and the stories she had shared about life in America. In his heart, he knew his mom loved him and hadn't left by choice. Back in America, Isabella fought every day. She joined support groups and met other parents who had also been separated from their children. She even gave speeches, hoping to help other mothers in similar situations. 5 years after coming back to America, Isabella got big news. One of her lawyers had found a lawyer in Saudi Arabia who was willing to help her. It was a tiny bit of hope, like the sun rising after a long, dark night. Determined more than ever, Isabella worked hard with her lawyers, Diego and Rashid, to put together her case. She studied every paper, every law, hoping to find something that would let her see her children again. Months went by, and finally, the day of the first court hearing came. Isabella dressed in modest clothes and wore a headscarf. She felt her heart racing as she entered the courtroom. Zaid was there too, looking cold and unfriendly. Isabella felt scared but reminded herself why she was there, to see her children. The trial was long and tiring. Rashid, her lawyer, argued that the children needed their mother and that her presence was important for their happiness. Zaid's lawyer argued that Isabella had left the children and didn't deserve to see them. Isabella stayed quiet, holding back her tears. She had to stay strong. At the end, the judge said he would need more time to make a decision. A month later, the judge finally announced his verdict. He said that Isabella would be allowed to see her children, but only in supervised visits. She would get to see them once a month with someone watching over them. Isabella cried tears of joy. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. Zaid, angry with the decision, promised to fight against it, but for now, Isabella had a chance to see her kids. 2 weeks later, the day of the first visit arrived. Isabella was so nervous she could hardly breathe. The meeting place wasn't very nice. It was a plain building with plain rooms, but for Isabella, it was like a magical place, because it meant she would finally see her children. When the door opened, Jacob, Owen, and their little sister, Lily, stood there, looking at her with mixed feelings. Curious, but unsure. Isabella wanted to run to them and hug them tightly, but she held back, remembering they hadn't seen her in so long. With tears running down her face, she said, "I'm your mom. I've missed you all so much." For a moment, the children just stood there. Then, Jacob took a small step forward and said softly, "I remember you." Isabella used to sing songs to her children in English. Just hearing her voice made her children feel happy and close to her again. Isabella was filled with so many feelings. She could hardly talk. Slowly, her children came closer. The next 2 hours went by with small talks, gentle hugs, and quiet promises. When it was time to say goodbye, Isabella felt her heart break. But now, she also had hope. She wasn't just a stranger to them anymore. She was their mother, and she was fighting to bring them home. As she watched her children walk away, Isabella made a promise to herself. No matter how long it took, no matter what she had to do, she would find a way to bring her children back to her. This visit was just the beginning. She left the visitation center feeling strong and ready to keep fighting to be with her kids. Isabella knew the road would be long and hard, and her children's father, Zaid, would keep fighting her in court. But now, she had something she didn't have for 5 long years, a bit of hope. Walking under the American sun, Isabella thought about the battles ahead. Zaid wouldn't give up easily, and the laws were still tough on her. But after seeing her children, holding their hands and hearing their voices, Isabella felt stronger. Her fight wasn't just for her, it was for her children. She fought for Jacob, who remembered her songs, for Owen, whose eyes showed sadness, and for Hannah, who laughed like they used to. She knew the journey to bring her children back to her would be long and hard. There would be more court battles, more sad goodbyes, and more nights when she couldn't sleep. But now, she had something she hadn't felt in years, a little bit of hope. As her taxi drove her back to her hotel, Isabella looked out at the city. This place used to feel like a prison, but now it was where she would fight for her family. And this time, she wasn't going to give up. The future was uncertain, and she didn't know if she'd ever bring her children back to the home they could call their own. But she knew she would keep fighting, day by day, year by year she had to, because Isabella understood that a mother's love is strong. It does not stop at borders. It doesn't listen to unfair laws, and it doesn't give up. With her love for her children as her strength, Isabella was ready for any challenge. As the sun set, Isabella closed her eyes and made a promise to herself. She whispered, "We will be together again, no matter how long it takes, no matter what I have to do. I'll find a way to bring you home." With this promise in her heart, Isabella prepared for the long road ahead, knowing that each step brought her closer to her children. Owen, who had once been quiet and shy, began to feel safe under Isabella's love. The youngest, Gustavo, clung to his mom during every visit, afraid she might disappear. Meanwhile, the legal fight continued. Zaid was angry with the court's decision and promised to appeal. Isabella and her lawyers faced many problems and worked through the complicated laws in Saudi Arabia. Every small win felt huge, and every loss was painful, but Isabella refused to give up. Back in the United States, people started to hear Isabella's story. She became the face of a big struggle. She spoke for mothers everywhere who were separated from their children by unfair laws. She shared her story in interviews, events, and with anyone who would listen, hoping that her voice would make a difference. She received so much support. People from all over the world sent her messages of hope, and human rights groups joined her cause. But the journey was still tough. Every time she had to say goodbye to her children after a visit, her heart broke again. Watching them grow and change, knowing she was missing out on so much, was hard to bear. Some nights, she felt like the struggle was too much. But each morning, she would look in the mirror and remind herself why she was fighting. For Jacob, Owen, and Lily, for all mothers in her situation, for love, and for justice. As time went on, Isabella saw changes in her children. Jacob, now a teenager, started to question the stories Zaid had told them about her. Owen, who faced many restrictions as a girl in Saudi Arabia, looked at her mother with new admiration. And even Gustavo, still young, began to understand more about their family situation. One day, during a visit, Jacob asked Isabella a question that would change everything. "Mom," he said softly, could we come live with you in the U.S.? Isabella's heart stopped. This was a question she had been hoping and waiting to hear. "Sweetheart," she answered, "nothing would make me happier, but it's complicated. Your father has custody, and the laws here." "I know," Jacob interrupted, frustrated but determined. "But we're not little kids anymore. Don't we get a choice?" This conversation gave Isabella a new hope. If her children wanted to be with her, maybe they could say so in court, and maybe, just maybe, they'd have a chance. With new energy, Isabella and her lawyers worked on a new legal plan. They focused on the children's right to have a say in their lives. It was risky in a country where fathers had almost complete control, but it was a chance they had to take. The next months were filled with busy legal work. Isabella spent her time visiting her children, meeting with her lawyers, and continuing her advocacy work. Every day was a struggle, but the thought of reuniting with her children gave her strength. Finally, after what felt like forever, the day of the big court hearing came. Isabella entered the courtroom, her heart pounding. Zaid was already there, his face cold and serious. For the first time, her children were there too. The judge listened to both sides. Isabella's lawyers argued that the children should have a relationship with both parents and a voice in decisions that affected them. Then, the judge asked Jacob to speak. With a courage beyond his years, Jacob talked about his love for both parents. But he also talked about his wish to know his mom's country and to experience a different life. He spoke for his siblings, too, saying they had talked about this together as a family. Isabella listened with tears in her eyes, so proud of her children. When Jacob finished, the room was silent. Even Zaid seemed moved by his son's words. The judge said he would need time to think carefully about the case. For Isabella, the waiting was painful. Finally, the day of the decision arrived. Isabella walked into the courtroom, feeling like everything she had fought for was on the line. The judge began to speak. After thinking about the whole case and listening to the children, he announced the decision. Isabella held her breath. "Custody is granted to the mother, Isabella, on a shared basis," the judge said. "The children will spend half the year in the United States with their mother and the other half in Saudi Arabia with their father. Isabella couldn't believe it. Had she really won? The room filled with noise as people reacted. Zaid was furious and promised to appeal, but Isabella barely noticed. She looked at her children, who were smiling at her with joy and awe. At that moment, Isabella knew her fight wasn't over. There would be more legal battles and obstacles, but for the first time, she felt hopeful. She would finally be able to be with her children, to show them her country, and to share her culture with them. As she left the courtroom, surrounded by her lawyers and with her children by her side, Isabella felt a peace she hadn't felt in years. That night, as she prepared to sleep, Isabella received a call from her mother in the U.S. With happy tears, she shared the news. "Mom," she said, her voice shaking, "we're coming home. All of us." As she hung up, Isabella looked out at the city that was once like a prison to her. Now it was where she had won her greatest victory. Tomorrow, she would begin to prepare to bring her children back to the U.S. It was a new beginning, a chance to heal from the past and build a future together. That night, she lay down with her heart full of thanks and hope. The struggle had been long and painful, but it had been worth it, because in the end, a mother's love was stronger than anything. And with the promise of a new dawn, Isabella closed her eyes, dreaming of the day she and her children would walk together on American soil, free to be a family. If this story made you think or gave you a new perspective, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss our future videos. Let's keep sharing thought-provoking stories and learning from life's lessons together. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.